Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When I returned to reclaim my family's land, I expected peace, not war. What I found instead were strangers living on stolen soil, a web of fraud, and a battle that would test every ounce of my resolve. This was no simple homecoming. This was a fight for legacy. When I was a kid, I used to run barefoot across these fields, chasing fireflies and building forts out of old timber by the pond my grandfather dug with his own hands. Collins land, that's what folks around here called it. 300 acres of pure, untouched beauty, rolling meadows, winding creeks, dense patches of forest, and that old pond that glittered under the sun like a coin tossed into the sky. It wasn't just land, it was legacy. It was blood and memory stitched into the soil. Life, though, has a funny way of pulling you away from the things that matter most. After college, I moved to the city for work, convinced I needed to carve out my own future, far from the familiar. A career in engineering kept me chained to concrete jungles for 2 decades. I'd fly in once or twice a year to walk the property, breathe in the smell of wet earth, and promise myself I'd come back for good one day. Always one day. But one day turned into 20 years. And it wasn't until my father's funeral that the weight of what I'd left behind truly sank in. Sitting there, listening to the stories of his youth on this very land, I realized I was the last of the Collins line. If I didn't come back, the place would eventually fade away, like so many other family homesteads swallowed by time, taxes, and developers. That thought hit me harder than any grief could. So I made a decision. I sold my apartment, packed up my life into a weathered pickup truck, and set out to reclaim what was mine. No more waiting for retirement, no more empty promises. I was going home. The drive itself felt like a pilgrimage. As the miles of asphalt fell away behind me, replaced by dusty backroads and familiar landmarks, I could almost feel the old land calling to me. The sun was setting as I crested the final hill, casting everything in golden light, the same kind of sunsets I remembered from my boyhood summers. I pulled up to the old gate, half hanging on its hinges, and killed the engine. Silence. Real silence wrapped around me. No sirens, no honking cars, no vibrating phones. Just the hum of cicadas and the whisper of wind through tall grass. I got out and leaned against the hood, letting the peace of it soak into my bones. The house was long gone, a casualty of time and storms. But that didn't matter. I had plans to build again. A small cabin first, maybe later something bigger. I wanted to live slow, plant orchards, stock the pond again with bass, maybe even raise a few horses like my grandfather did. Standing there with the land stretching out before me, I felt something I hadn't in years, a profound sense of rightness. Like every crooked path I'd taken had led me exactly back to this point. I belonged here. This was where I was meant to be. I didn't know yet that something had been happening in my absence. Something ugly, something that would turn my dream of peace into the beginning of a war I never asked for. But for that one perfect moment, I was just a man coming home. The next morning, I set out early to walk the land, coffee thermos in hand, boots sinking into the damp earth. I planned to trace the old boundaries, make a mental list of what needed fencing, what parts needed clearing. It should have been a quiet morning of reconnecting with the land I loved. Instead, I found something that made my blood run cold. At the far northern edge of the property, past the second creek bed and the line of old cottonwoods, I stumbled onto 5 houses. New houses, gleaming, identical, soulless structures lined up like dolls on a shelf, each sitting neatly on what I knew damn well was my land. They weren't abandoned either. Cars sat in driveways. Toys were scattered across manicured lawns. Smoke curled from chimneys. Families lived here, on my property. I stood frozen for a moment, trying to process what I was seeing. How could this have happened? I hadn't sold an inch of Collins' land, not 1 acre. My grandfather had made me swear I never would. We were stubborn that way. Collins' blood was practically stitched together with barbed wire. As I walked closer, a different kind of anger bloomed in my chest. Small signs dotted the trail leading up to the houses, hammered into the ground like little flags of conquest. Willow Creek HOA, private area, members only. The words stared at me, bold and smug, like a slap across the face. Then I saw it, the worst insult of all. They had built a walking path down to the pond. My pond. They'd installed benches, picnic tables, even a little dock with a sign that read, Willow Creek Community Pond, residents only. The sheer audacity of it made my hands shake. That pond wasn't just water, it was family. I remembered my grandfather teaching me to fish on those muddy banks, my father setting up barbecues for the whole town during the 4th of July. Now, some strangers thought they could claim it with a few nails and laminated signs. Before I could fully wrap my head around it, the first crack of official trouble hit my mailbox. 2 days after discovering the houses, a formal letter arrived by certified mail. Heavy cream-colored paper, Willow Creek Homeowners Association letterhead. The gist of it was sickeningly clear. Since my land now abutted their development, I was being incorporated into their HOA. Effective immediately, I was required to join, abide by their rules, pay an annual fee of $12,000, and submit improvement plans for approval before making any changes to my property. If I refused, they'd sue me for interfering with community enjoyment and disrupting the unified neighborhood aesthetic. I stood on my porch rereading the letter over and over, feeling a slow, hot rage settle deep in my gut. HOA fees, community rules, aesthetic standards. They were trying to fold my legacy into their plastic-wrapped little fantasy land, as if it were just another empty lot to gobble up. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I wasn't about to let some paper pushers and opportunists steal my land without a fight. I drove straight into town that afternoon, the anger thrumming through my veins like a second heartbeat. First stop was the county clerk's office. If there'd been some kind of legitimate sale or subdivision, there would be records, public, certified, stamped by the same bureaucracy I despised but now desperately needed. What I found chilled me more than the sight of those houses. According to the official property maps, a large rectangular chunk of my northern acreage, about 20 acres, had been subdivided and listed under Willow Creek Development Zone 3. It was dated 5 years ago, back when I'd been neck-deep in city life, barely glancing at the annual property tax statements that kept arriving like clockwork. But the signature on the authorization form wasn't mine. Wasn't even close. A scrawled, sloppy forgery using a version of my name that no legal document had ever carried. Garrett Collins. Missing an R. Missing a soul. My heart pounded in my ears as I flipped through the file. There was more. A construction permit, again bearing a forged signature, granting permission to build up to 10 residential dwellings for community use. And, right next to it, a filed amendment to the local HOA charter expanding their jurisdiction to include the new builds along with any adjacent properties that shared infrastructure access, i.e., anyone unlucky enough to border their theft. That wasn't ignorance. It was fraud. Premeditated, orchestrated, deliberate theft of my land. I called the best real estate attorney in 3 counties before I even left the building. Her name was Megan Price, and within an hour, we had a plan. First step, hire an independent licensed surveyor to confirm the original land boundaries as filed decades ago. Second step, subpoena the full transaction history and force Willow Creek's HOA to provide their internal documentation. It didn't take long before the pieces started falling into place. The developer behind the houses was none other than Stanton Properties, a firm whose owner, Alan Stanton, happened to be the husband of none other than Linda Stanton, the sitting president of Willow Creek HOA. The whole scam reeked of backyard corruption. Linda had fast-tracked construction approvals through shady contacts in the county zoning board. She'd overseen the expansion of HOA regulations just in time to scoop my land into their greedy little club. It wasn't negligence. It was a straight-up, pre-planned land grab. Adding insult to injury, their paperwork referred to my family's pond, our pond, as the primary communal recreational resource of Willow Creek Estates. I wanted to put my fist through the drywall of the lawyer's office when Megan showed me that. Instead, I gritted my teeth and asked the only question that mattered. What's our next move? She smiled, the kind of smile that said somebody else's nightmare was about to begin. We burned them to the ground, legally. Within the week, the first volley had been fired. Megan filed an official lawsuit against Willow Creek HOA, Stanton Properties, and Linda Stanton personally, citing unlawful occupation, fraudulent acquisition, and damages related to land misuse. But we weren't stopping at a civil case. I also lodged formal complaints with the County Licensing Bureau, Zoning Commission, and, most satisfying of all, the District Attorney's Office. Fraud at this scale wasn't just a civil issue, it was a criminal one. The news spread faster than fire in a dry wheat field. Neighbors talked, whispers circulated. Even the local paper picked up the scent, running a small front-page story titled "Local Landowner Sues HOA Over Stolen Property." That didn't sit well with the folks at Willow Creek. Not at all. The next morning, I found the first dead threat crumpled under my windshield wiper, a cheap piece of printer paper typed out in bold, uneven letters. "Drop the case or else. We know where you live." Real creative. I laughed bitterly as I tore it up and tossed it into the ditch. These people didn't realize something crucial. Threats didn't scare a man who grew up shooting tin cans off fence posts at 100 yards before he hit puberty. If anything, it just made me more determined. Of course, the threats didn't stop at notes. One evening, as I came back from town, I spotted a black SUV idling near my gate. As I pulled in behind it, the driver hit the gas, tearing off down the road without plates. Anonymous cars started passing slowly by my property at odd hours. Lights shined through the trees late at night, more pathetic attempts to shake me up. Instead of rattling, I doubled down. I installed a full perimeter of security cameras, motion lights, private security patrols twice a day, every movement on my land recorded, time-stamped, stored on servers off-site. If they were going to escalate, I'd be ready, and I'd bury them with evidence. Meanwhile, Megan unleashed a different kind of hell in the courtrooms. Subpoenas flew like missiles. Requests for documentation, building permits, ownership transfers, internal HOA emails. Every brick of the Stanton scheme was getting pried loose and stacked into neat little piles for the judge to see. The deeper we dug, the worse it got for them. Records showed that HOA dues had been illegally funneled to cover construction overruns on the stolen properties. Tax filings were missing. Bribes had quietly slipped into the pockets of 2 county inspectors, now under their own separate investigation. Even some of the homeowners living in the new houses, those poor families who had unknowingly bought their little slice of paradise on my land, started to realize something was wrong. Notices began popping up on their doors, courtesy of Megan, informing them that their titles were legally void, that they were trespassers in the eyes of the law, until a final ruling was made. Willow Creek HOA, once so smug, started to crack under the pressure. They tried to counterattack, filing bogus claims against me for harassment, nuisance, even unneighborly conduct, all of it thrown out within days. Every motion they filed made them look more desperate, more guilty. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than rage gnawing at my gut. I felt victory getting closer. I could see it, rising up just beyond the horizon like a thunderhead ready to break. The courthouse smelled like old paper and desperation. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands clasped loosely together, trying to look calm even though my heart was pounding like a war drum. Across the aisle sat Linda Stanton, her designer suit, an icy smile doing a poor job of masking the sweat glistening on her forehead. She didn't look so smug now. Her lawyers flanked her like bodyguards, rifling through files, whispering frantically. Megan sat beside me, poised and razor-sharp, a stack of neatly organized evidence at her elbow. The judge, a stern woman with wire-framed glasses and a no-nonsense air, called the court to order. And just like that, the battle for my land began. Their defense was almost laughable. They tried to argue that I had abandoned the land by not living on it for years. They painted the construction as a public improvement, claiming it added value to the area. They even had the gall to suggest that by allowing the development to proceed without timely protest, I had tacitly agreed to the changes. Megan eviscerated them point by point. She started by establishing my chain of ownership, using original deeds signed by my grandfather himself. She brought in our independent surveyor, who demonstrated with detailed maps that the supposed subdivision encroached squarely into my rightful property. She introduced forensic handwriting experts who testified the signatures on the sale documents were crude forgeries. Then came the kicker. Megan unveiled a series of internal HOA emails obtained through subpoena, where Linda and her husband Alan openly discussed how easy it would be to file quiet title actions and fold in that lazy Collins land if no one was paying attention. Every lie they had told, every trick they had pulled, exposed under the cold fluorescent courtroom lights. Linda's face, once confident and unbothered, crumpled inch by inch as the evidence mounted. She whispered furiously to her lawyers, but it was useless. The tide was unstoppable now. Witnesses took the stand one after another, county clerks who admitted to looking the other way, a building inspector who confessed to accepting bribes, even a few homeowners who said they'd been pressured to stay silent. And when it was my turn, I stood tall and told the court about my grandfather's pond, about my family's legacy, about the promises I made standing on that soil as a boy. I spoke of betrayal, of being blindsided by greed disguised as community spirit. When I finished, there was a stillness in the courtroom, the kind of silence that tells you the truth had hit its mark. The judge didn't take long. After 2 days of testimony, she delivered her ruling. All titles issued on my land were nullified. The construction permits were revoked. Ownership of the full 300 acres, including the pond, was restored exclusively to me. Linda Stanton and Stanton Properties were ordered to pay damages, attorney's fees, and restoration costs. And in the final thunderous blow, Linda Stanton was found guilty of real estate fraud, conspiracy to defraud, and forgery. The judge sentenced her to 7 years in state prison, effective immediately. I watched without a flicker of sympathy as the bailiff clicked the cuffs around her wrists and led her away. She didn't look back. She didn't dare. I should have felt triumphant in that moment, but all I felt was tired. Tired, but free. The dust from the trial hadn't even fully settled when I stood once again at the northern edge of my land, staring out at the 5 houses that had caused so much heartache. For a long time, I wrestled with what to do. Part of me wanted to bulldoze every last board, grind them into dust just to erase the insult. But another, quieter part of me, maybe the one that had learned a few things about patience and opportunity over the years, saw something different. Those houses were built illegally, sure, but they were solid. Modern construction, good layouts, nice fixtures. 5 nearly new homes sitting on prime land just waiting for someone to breathe honest life into them. I called Megan to make sure the legal path was clear. She confirmed it. Now that ownership was fully restored to me, I had every right to do with them as I pleased. No liens, no attachments. They were mine through and through. So I made a decision. I wouldn't destroy them, I'd claim them, rebuild them not just as houses, but as investments into the future of this land. It didn't take long to get everything in order. I registered the properties under a new business name, Collins Creek Rentals, LLC, brought in contractors I trusted to do inspections, upgrades, fix any shoddy construction the Stantons had cut corners on. What started as a battlefield was slowly transforming into a thriving little community. My community, on my terms. Within 3 months, all 5 houses were rented out. Families, retirees, young couples looking for a bit of country peace without the city sprawl breathing down their necks. I set fair rents, made clear rules about respect for the land, and most of all, no HOA. Ever. It felt good, better than I expected. The money coming in helped cover legal fees and repairs. More importantly, it helped turn the chapter, giving the stolen land a purpose again, without erasing the past. The pond was still mine, untouched, the heart of it all. I fenced off private access for myself and posted clear signage. Private property, Collins Family Pond, no trespassing. Sometimes I'd sit by the water in the evenings, watching the renters' porch lights wink on across the fields, a different kind of constellation. For the first time in a long time, there was peace. But peace, it seemed, was something Linda Stanton could not abide. Even from the county jail, she found ways to stir the pot. Whispers started, ugly rumors about how I stole the homes from hard-working families. Flyers left in mailboxes, anonymous calls at night where the line stayed silent but heavy breathing filled the receiver. Little things, each easy to dismiss on its own, but together they painted a darker picture. Linda wasn't done with me yet. I knew better than to underestimate her, and I knew that when a snake gets cornered, it's liable to strike with everything it's got left. I tightened security around the rental homes, added more cameras, more patrols, made sure every move on my land was logged and recorded. I wasn't just protecting property anymore. I was preparing for the next battle. It started small, just like most fires do. At first, it was vandalism. Someone slashed the tires on one of the rental home's SUVs in the middle of the night. Another tenant woke up to find their mailbox ripped off the post and smashed into pieces at the foot of the driveway. Graffiti sprayed across a fence. Thief in dripping red paint. The sheriff's department took my report seriously, but unless someone was caught in the act, there wasn't much they could do beyond patrols and warnings. Still, I knew who was behind it. It wasn't some random punk or neighbor with a grudge. This had Linda's signature all over it, petty, cruel, and wrapped in the poisonous illusion that she was somehow the real victim. Then the threats started again. Typed letters slipped into tenants' mailboxes, unsigned but unmistakable in tone. "You're living on stolen land. Better start packing before it's too late." Phone calls in the dead of night, the same raspy breathing on the other end. Anonymous social media pages popped up, accusing me of being a fraud, a criminal, a land grabber. It was clear Linda still had friends on the outside willing to do her dirty work. And somewhere, somehow, she was pulling strings even behind bars. But intimidation was a game I had already beaten her at once. I wasn't about to start flinching now. I met with Megan again. She helped me tighten every legal defense around my properties: restraining orders, emergency injunctions, civil suits ready to be filed at the first actionable offense. At the same time, I coordinated with the sheriff's office to beef up patrols even more, and I upgraded my own surveillance system until there wasn't a square foot of my land that wasn't watched from 3 angles. It didn't take long before the noose began to tighten. One night, around 2 a.m., my cameras caught a figure sneaking across the north fence line, dressed in dark clothes, carrying what looked like a canister. Moving low, staying in the shadows, clearly knowing the land better than some random outsider would. I watched in real time from my security monitor as the figure crept toward one of the storage sheds near the rental homes, one filled with tools, gasoline, propane tanks. A perfect target if someone were looking to send a message through fire. I didn't hesitate. I hit the panic button that directly dialed the sheriff's department and jumped into my truck, tearing down the dirt roads toward the north line. My headlights caught the figure mid-action, bent low over the shed door, trying to jimmy it open. The figure froze like a deer in the beams. For a moment, we just stared at each other, and then they bolted. They didn't make it far. Deputies caught them less than 100 yards down the road, tackled them hard enough to raise dust clouds that hung in the moonlight. It was Linda. She had shaved her hair close and lost weight, probably trying to change her appearance, but the fire still burned in her eyes. Pure hatred, pure entitlement, pure madness. When they cuffed her, she started screaming, ranting about how the land was hers, how the HOA still lived even if the law didn't recognize it. Spittle flying, eyes wild. This wasn't just personal vengeance anymore, it was obsession. The prosecutors didn't waste any time. This time, she wasn't just facing minor fraud charges, she was hit with attempted arson, criminal trespass, destruction of property, violation of restraining orders, and attempted intimidation of witnesses. Multiple felonies. No chance of bail. The court moved swiftly. Linda Stanton was sentenced to an additional 10 years on top of her previous sentence, with no eligibility for early release. As they led her away in shackles once more, I realized something deep in my bones. This wasn't just the end of a grudge. It was the final, bitter end of a woman who thought she could bend the world to her will and shattered herself against something stronger. The land stood. I stood. And Linda? She was just another ghost lost to the dust of Collins Creek. Months slipped by after Linda's final sentencing, and for the first time in years, true silence returned to Collins Creek. Not the kind of silence born from fear or tension, but a steady, living peace. The kind my grandfather used to talk about when he sat on the porch, a cold lemonade in one hand and a shotgun resting across his knees. The rental homes settled into a quiet rhythm. New families moved in, respectful of the land, grateful for the space. Kids splashed in backyard kiddie pools during the summer. Dogs barked at squirrels. Porch lights flickered on at dusk like fireflies. Life, simple and steady, had returned to this place. I spent most mornings by the pond, coffee in hand, watching the mist rise off the water. I'd fixed up the old dock myself, sanding it down, replacing boards, staining it deep cedar red. I installed a heavy wooden sign on the path leading down. Collins Family Pond, private property, trespassers prosecuted. But it wasn't about warning anymore. It was about honoring what was ours. Sometimes neighbors from town stopped by to chat. Old-timers who remembered my grandfather, kids who'd grown up hearing stories about the 4th of July, fish fries by the pond. They came to share memories, to thank me for keeping the land whole. Those visits meant more than I could say. The nightmares faded. The fear that someone else would come clawing at the land receded like a bad dream. I knew now how to fight, and more importantly, that I wasn't fighting alone anymore. The story of Collins Creek spread wider than I expected. Local papers ran updates. Real estate lawyers used it as a case study on property rights. Even a few bigger outlets picked it up, painting it as a rare win for the little guy, against the faceless machinery of suburban sprawl. Sometimes I'd get letters from strangers, people fighting their own HOA battles, thanking me for standing up, for not backing down when it would have been so much easier to sell, to run, to give in. But that was never an option. This land wasn't just a piece of earth with a price tag. It was a promise, a living, breathing testament to everyone who had come before me and everyone who might come after. As the sun set one evening, throwing long shadows across the fields, I sat back in my chair, the cool breeze carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass. I watched the lights flicker across the rented homes, heard the faint laughter of children somewhere down the lane. Linda Stanton was gone, swallowed by her own bitterness. Willow Creek HOA was a name only whispered now, a cautionary tale for anyone who thought they could steal what they hadn't earned. And me? I was exactly where I belonged. Home.